The development of the Glauco-class submarines marked Italy's first step toward mass production for the Royal Navy. This project built on the experimental foundation of the submarine Delfino, which was launched in 1890 as the first Italian prototype. The Delfino was fully electric. The boat was built at the naval shipyard in La Spezia. She showed good stability and maneuverability, but had serious range problems due to the lack of an internal combustion engine. Because of this, the vessel was used mainly to train naval engineers. Naval engineer Giacinto Pollino designed the Delfino. In his original design, a single electric motor drove 3 propellers, one on the horizontal axis and 2 on the vertical. Later, another designer, Cesare Laurenti, modernized this submarine by changing the hull shape and adding an engine for surfaced running. In her first configuration, the Delfino had a surface displacement of only about 105 short tons. The crew consisted of 1 officer and 7 sailors. This shows how much Italian engineering still needed to develop before creating the Glauco class. In the early 1900s, due to growing tensions in Europe, the Italian Navy decided to expand its capabilities. They began creating practical vessels for coastal defense. Italy shifted from single prototypes to a systematic approach to counter potential threats in the Adriatic Sea from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Naval engineer Cesare Laurenti, often called the father of Italian submarines, played the leading role in this evolution. Earlier, between 1902 and 1904, he modernized the Delfino by adding a gasoline engine for surfaced running and charging the batteries. In 1905, Laurenti became the technical director of the Muggiano shipyard in La Spezia. There he designed the Glauco-class submarines as semi-experimental vessels. He introduced innovations like internal ballast tanks in a single hull design, which increased safety and compartmentalization. This hybrid approach combined American single-hull simplicity with the French reliability of a partial double hull. Priority was given to domestic development to reduce dependence on foreign technology. Laurenti graduated from the Royal Naval School of Genoa with a degree in naval and mechanical engineering on June 7, 1892. In 1903, he was assigned to the Royal Arsenal in Venice, shortly before taking charge of the Glauco project. His career went far beyond this first class. At the Muggiano shipyard, he designed the submarine Foca, the Medusa class, the Argonauta, and the wartime mass-produced F-class. His reputation spread abroad as well. He received export orders, including the British S-class submarines in 1914 and the American USS G4 for the United States Navy between 1909 and 1910. This work cemented his status as the leading Italian submarine designer of that era. In his work, he drew on his study of international designs, particularly John Holland's early submersibles and German advancements in engine development. He adapted them, focusing on maneuverable, torpedo-armed boats that were perfectly suited for harbor defense and short-range patrols, rather than deep-water ocean missions. In total, this class included 5 submarines: Glauco, Narvalo, Otaria, Squalo, and Tricheco. They were laid down at the naval shipyard in Venice between 1905 and 1909. This reflected the philosophy of Laurenti, who viewed submarines as submersible torpedo boats optimized for surface speed and stability in narrow waters like the Adriatic Sea. These vessels retained an experimental nature. Changes were made during construction, such as different torpedo tube configurations. They were popularly known as benzinari because they used highly flammable gasoline engines for surface running. Although this created a serious fire hazard, the Glauco class was a critical step toward developing more reliable diesel-electric models in subsequent Italian designs. The 1905 Italian submarine Glauco was a small coastal-type vessel. It was designed by engineer Cesare Laurenti. The boat featured a compact single-hull design, ideal for shallow waters and harbor defense. The length was 121 feet, the beam was 14 feet, and the draft was 8 feet. These dimensions made it highly maneuverable in coastal areas. Displacement was 176 tons surfaced and 269 tons submerged after flooding the ballast tanks. The power plant was gasoline and electric. 4 Fiat gasoline engines produced a total of 600 horsepower for surface running. Submerged, it used two Civiliano electric motors generating 170 horsepower. Power was transmitted through two shafts to twin screws. While this was an innovative solution for its time, it had its drawbacks. Gasoline engines in an enclosed space were unreliable, and the risk of highly flammable vapors accumulating was very high. The maximum surface speed reached 13 knots, while the maximum submerged speed was 7.5 knots. The surface range was 173 nautical miles at maximum speed, or 259 nautical miles at 10 knots. Submerged, the boat could travel 21 nautical miles at maximum speed, or 93 nautical miles at 3.5 knots. The maximum diving depth was limited to 82 feet. The armament consisted of three 18-inch bow torpedo tubes. This was a unique configuration for the Glauco, as other vessels of this class only had two tubes each. There were also two spare torpedoes on board. There was no deck gun on the boat. Italian submarines of that era were not equipped with surface artillery until the introduction of the Polino class in 1913. Therefore, all offensive power relied on the bow tubes. They fired 18-inch torpedoes, which became the standard for the Italian submarine fleet after the modernization of the submarine Delfino in 1902. The crew consisted of 2 officers and 13 sailors, which once again highlighted the modest size of this submarine. Construction of the Italian submarine Glauco, the first of its class, began on July 31, 1903, at the Royal Italian Navy State Shipyard in Venice. This shipyard used shipbuilding methods that were traditional for the early 20th century. The steel plates of the pressure hull were joined with rivets. This provided reliability during dives to shallow depths of around 82 feet. However, due to a lack of experience in building submarines, serious difficulties arose. Engineers had to deal with design flaws and constantly make changes right while assembling the hull. Glauco was the first of 5 submarines in this class. They were built in Venice in parallel, but sequentially, so that mistakes could be corrected immediately on new models. For example, on the next boat, Squallow, laid down in January 1904, Thornycroft motors were installed instead of Fiat engines. This helped solve the persistent power issues that occurred on the first prototypes. Eventually, the shipyards in La Spezia and Muggiano became the main centers for Italian submarine construction. Venice, on the other hand, only built this single class of vessels. This was because in the beginning, the Italian Navy distributed production across various plants before concentrating it in La Spezia. During construction, the single-hull submarine was equipped with gasoline engines. Because of storing this kind of fuel on board, the sailors nicknamed these vessels benzinari. Also during assembly, they decided to remove one torpedo tube compared to the original design. This was the result of technical limitations related to engine reliability and the pressure hull's ability to withstand pressure. By 1905, preparatory work was almost finished. After 2 years of construction, a real experiment for Italy's nascent submarine program, the boat was launched. This happened on July 9, 1905, in Venice, marking the complete hull assembly. The submarine was fully completed in December of that same year. On December 15, 1905, she officially joined the fleet. Initially, she served mainly as a training vessel in the Adriatic Sea. After commissioning, sea trials began. The crew tested the operation of the 2 Fiat gasoline engines for surface running and the electric motors for submerged running. They also tested her dive capability and the operation of her 3 17.7-inch torpedo tubes. These trials revealed serious issues with the gasoline engines. They broke down frequently, and fuel vapors created an explosion risk. This significantly limited the submarine's capabilities in the early stages of her service. Despite all the difficulties, the tests confirmed that the boat was suitable for harbor defense and crew training. Because of this, she was assigned to serve in Venice and Brindisi. On December 15, 1905, the submarine Glauco joined the Royal Italian Navy. She was immediately sent to Venice for training missions. There, the boat conducted numerous experimental cruises along the Adriatic coast to teach crews the basics of operation and tactics. These training exercises were extremely important, as Glauco was one of the first production submarines in Italy's young fleet. The submarine participated in major pre-war naval exercises. In 1906, she maneuvered in the waters off Taranto alongside her sister submarine, Squalo, and in 1908, she conducted exercises in the Tyrrhenian Sea with Squalo and Narvalo. Operations like these made it possible to test Glauco's capabilities in joint fleet actions and help shape Italian submarine warfare tactics during a period of constant technological experimentation. The submarine's motto was, in Latin, Gloria Audaciae Comes, which means, glory is the companion of bravery. This perfectly captured the spirit of those early trials. In August 1914, amid growing tensions in Europe, Glauco was officially assigned to the 4th Submarine Division in Venice. Along with submarines Squalo, Delfino, and Foca, she came under the command of Lieutenant Paolo Tolosetto Farinata degli Uberti. The division's main task was the defense of ports in the Adriatic Sea. This completely aligned with the Italian fleet's strategy, which focused on coastal defense leading up to a potential conflict. At the start of the war, in August 1914, Italy had only 22 submarines in service, while the Austro-Hungarian fleet had 27. However, the mere presence of submarines like Glauco along the Adriatic coast forced large Austro-Hungarian ships to stay closer to their heavily fortified base in Pula. Over the course of the war, the Italian fleet lost 7 submarines in combat. Operating Glauco was tough because of her gasoline engines. They ran poorly and emitted dangerous fumes, requiring constant checks on ventilation. This limited the length of her patrols and posed a serious threat to the crew when submerged. Because of these technical limitations, during the pre-war years, the submarine was used mostly for short-distance training and defensive tasks, rather than large-scale strategic operations. After Italy entered World War I on May 24, 1915, the submarine Glauco was based in Brindisi. She operated as part of the 4th Division and led an independent squadron under the command of Corvette Captain Farinata degli Uberti. The boat's primary wartime task was defense. She protected the Italian Adriatic coast from attacks by the Austro-Hungarian fleet. In 1916, the Glauco was transferred to Taranto, where she and her sister submarine, the Otaria, formed a new independent group. In May of that same year, the boat was sent to Valona, which is modern-day Vlor in Albania. Under the command of Achille Gaspari Cinali, the Glauco was placed under the High Naval Command for operations in the southern Adriatic Sea. These moves allowed the Glauco to support Italy's overall efforts to blockade enemy forces in fortified bases like Pola. During her service from 1915 to 1916, the Glauco made 65 defensive patrols. These were mostly ambushes near the ports of Bari, Barletta, and Valona. Over this time, the boat logged 296 hours submerged and 252 hours surfaced. These missions focused on coastal defense, and the boat recorded no sunken targets or major battles. In August 1916, after returning to Taranto, the Glauco was disarmed and placed in reserve at the base of the support ship Umberto Messana. Brindisi remained closely tied to this submarine class until the end of the war. A famous photograph from 1918 shows 3 Glauco-class boats moored together in the harbor. This shot confirms that these submarines were still in use, even though the Glauco herself had already been out of the active fleet for 2 years by that point. The Italian submarine Glauco was officially removed from the active fleet on September 1, 1916. The period of heavy combat clearly showed the age of the vessel and the limits of her design. Since the Glauco was an early experimental submarine launched back in 1905, she was technically inferior to newer models. Plus, the wear and tear took a toll after 65 patrols and over 500 hours of operation near the Adriatic ports of Bari, Barletta, and Valona. In 1916, the Glauco finished her active service. After her deployment to Valona, where she supported operations against Austro-Hungarian forces, the boat returned to Taranto in August and went into reserve. The disarmed boat was converted into a floating hull and assigned to a group of disarmed submarines at the base of the ship Umberto Messana. From then on, she carried out non-combat duties for the defense of the Adriatic. Very few historical records survived about exactly how the decommissioning process, maintenance, or stripping of equipment took place. This is a typical gap in the records for pre-war experimental vessels like the Glauco. She remained in Taranto in this disarmed state until 1921, which marked the final end of her history in the Italian Navy. After being decommissioned in Taranto, the submarine Glauco was sold in 1921 to the Romanian maritime Lloyd, where she was either converted into a training vessel or sent for scrap. Exact information about her use in Romania is scarce, and there are no records of the boat seeing active military service under her new owners. As the lead boat of the first production class of Italian submarines, the Glauco made a significant contribution to early submarine doctrine and the combat experience of the Italian Navy during World War I. This influenced the design and tactics of later classes, like the Medusa from 1911 and the Foca from 1908. The Foca in particular was a direct and enlarged continuation of the Glauco design. This submarine featured 3 shafts and 3 sets of Fiat gasoline engines, producing a total output of 800 horsepower. In April 1909, during sea trials near Naples, a catastrophic explosion and fuel fire broke out in the engine room of the Foca. The accident was so severe that the crew deliberately flooded the boat to save the hull. This incident was the turning point that convinced Naval Command to permanently abandon gasoline engines in favor of diesel power for all future classes. Despite its relatively short operational life, the Glauco is a prime example of Italy's shift from experimental to standardized submarine production, which helped the Navy prepare for future conflicts. There were no efforts to preserve this particular submarine. Most likely, the Glauco was scrapped soon after it was decommissioned, and no artifacts or memorials related to the submarine have survived to this day.